Yep, here we go. So today we will talk about chapter 3. We will discuss about the classic theories of economic growth and development. So today we will talk about the classic or traditional or old theories in development. Meanwhile, in chapter 4, we talk about the new theories or contemporary research in development. Okay, if you have any question, you can type in the chat box or you can turn on your microphone and ask me directly. Okay, so let's begin. All right, so there are at least 4 or 5 theories, classic theories in development and growth that we will discuss today. So the slide that I share to you today is the summary of the textbook chapter. So if you are curious about the complete version of the theory or of the research that are discussed here, you can definitely read it in your book. But I will try to summarize the main idea of the chapter through this presentation. Okay. So the very first theory that we will discuss is the classic theories. So we have 4 approach here. 4 approach of classic theory in development. The very first that we will talk about is the linear stage growth model. This is a growth theory by Rostow. I am sure you have heard about this theory before. So this is Rostow's theories. We will talk about a theory about structural change. So that's the Lewis theory, and I think Harold Domar also talk about it. This is Harold Domar and also Lewis. And then we will discuss about international dependence revolution. And then last one, we will discuss about neoclassical and free market counter revolution. This is Solow theory or Solow growth model. In development 2, in the next course that you will take on development, you will discuss a lot about Solow especially. But today we will just take a glance of what Solow theory is about. Okay, let's begin with the linear stage theory or Rostow theory. So this is a classic statement, Rostow stage of growth. Oh, sorry. So the linear stage theory, we will have 2 theory here. The first one is Rostow's theory, and then the second one is Harold Domar theory, sometimes referred to AK model. Let's take a look at Rostow's theory first. So Rostow stated that in order to grow, no, not in order to grow, but he stated that a country will go through every stage of this 5 stage of growth when they try to reach their development target. So let's take a look at this 5 stage. The first one is, let me use, okay, maybe yellow. The stage 1 here is the traditional society. This is where a country lean towards their agriculture, and then they do barter or exchange of goods instead of using money. And then they usually do subsistence system where they grow their own food, but they do not sell the food. Instead, they consume it for themselves. That's the subsistence system. And then in this stage, usually a country will be dependent on rural economy. And then after that, the next stage is stage 2, that is transitional stage. That's where a country, they start to do specialization. Like for example, country A, they realize that they can specialize in producing corn or rice, then they will specialize in that. And then they will trade, not a country. For example, in Indonesia, there is province A and then province B. Province A realized that they are good at growing rice. Meanwhile, Province B, they are good at fishing. Nah, then Province A will specialize in growing rice, and Province B will specialize in fishing. And then Province A will have surplus of rice, and then Province B will have surplus of fish. And then what's going to happen is they're going to trade with each other. And then in this stage also, infrastructure is starting to grow. So they start to build a simple and new infrastructure. In the second stage, the country will be dependent on social appreciation of education and skill development. And then we will go to the stage 3, that is take off. In this stage, usually industrialization has begun, and then investment is growing, and then not every, but most of the region in the country, they start to grow, and then there will be political change into better institution, typically like that. In this stage, a country will be dependent on suburban economy. Okay. And then after that, stage 4 is drive to maturity. This is where diversification appear, innovation also appear, and then there will be less reliance on imports, and then more investment. Okay, so this is where a country is no longer rely a lot on imports, because they can fulfill what they need through their own production system, although they still do international trade, export, import, but the reliance on the import is not as much as before. In this stage, a country will be dependent on growth and developed economies. And then the last stage, this is the high mass consumption. In this stage, the economy will be consumer oriented, and they will produce durable goods. The production of durable goods flourish, and then service sector becomes dominant. In this stage, a country will be dependent on global economy or market managing economies. So that's the 5 stage that Rostow stated. So he said that in order for developing countries to be developed, they have to go through this 5 stage. Is it true? Does it really happen in real life? Is there any evidence that Rostow's theory actually applied in real life? Well, the answer is it's debatable, but sometimes people use China as an example for this stage of growth. So China started from the traditional society stage, and then transitional stage, and then their industry flourished, and then it is debatable whether they are already in this stage or not, but some researchers or some economists sometimes use China as an example of this, the first 3 stage. And then actually, I think stage 4 also makes sense if we take China as an example, but it is debatable whether they are already in the stage 4 or not. But some other economists, some other researchers also deny that Rostow's theory is applicable in real life. Because the truth is, sometimes a country can grow very rapidly and fast without taking every stage in the 5 stage. So it doesn't have to be at this exact urutan, you know. It doesn't have to be like this. A country can go to directly from stage 1 to stage 3, for example, or doesn't go to stage 1 but go to stage 2, and then stage 3, and then stage 5. It could happen. It could happen like that. So what Rostow stated in the theory doesn't always happen in real life. But anyway, In the old days, this was the theory of development by Rostow. And then as time goes by, there are a lot of new theory in development. And also Rostow stated this theory while it was in the World War. I'm not sure if it was World War I or World War II. So it's very understandable why he stated this theory. Okay, any question for Rostow's theory? Not yet. Okay, I will
I'm
go
sorry,
in.
ma'am.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to ask, when you said that a country can just take off or start at the stage 3 or just go to the stage 5 like that, for example. But for example, if a country is at the start at the stage 3, does he previously should have good infrastructure first, ma'am? I think. So I
Okay.
think it's really strange. For example, a country suddenly have a industrialization and growing investment like that. I mean, ma'am, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's a good question, actually. Yes, that would be strange, but let me. Nah, so this is the criticism of Rostow's model. Okay, maybe what I said before is a bit extreme, but the truth is sometimes a country can grow without going to the first stage, the traditional society here. So they can skip quote unquote that stage. Why? Because that's what happened in the United States, for example. So we know that the current no wait, let me use an appropriate words in here. So you know, when there was industrial revolution in England a long time ago, there are a lot of people who came to the United States of America, the current United States of America. So they come from the Europe to the US, and then they stay in that land. They colonialize those land. And then what happened after that, when the Industrial Revolution happened, the new US people who come from the Europe, then they go directly from there. Yes, there was some agriculture before that, but the truth is there wasn't traditional society. What traditional society mean here is those who used to hunt and gather, and those who used to live with the nature. You know what I mean, right? Traditional society, like people who live in the jungle, when they gather stuff and then they hunt for themselves and then they grow their own food for themselves. But with the US, for example, when they came from the Europe, they quote unquote skip the traditional society and they go to the agriculture, and then after that industrial revolution happened, and then they can adopt the technology from the industrial revolution. So that was the example that sometimes a country might be able to skip one of the stage in 5 stage, and then sometimes when you go to the let me see. For example, when a country already reached the third stage, for example, it is possible for them like skip the fourth stage and then go directly to the 5 stage. That's also possible. So that's what I mean by sometimes the stage can be skipped. It doesn't always to be as rigid as 1, 2, 3, 4, but maybe it can go from the second one first, and then the third, and then the fifth, or maybe the first one, and then the second, and then maybe the third, and then directly to the 5. The fourth is skipped. So that's the criticism for Rostow, because especially when in the modern era, the current developing countries, when they want to go to when they want to become developed countries, the step can definitely be skipped. Why? Because the technological externalities from the already developed countries can easily get adopted for the to the developing countries. So thank you for the question, but that
Thank you, ma'am.
was, yeah, you're welcome. That was the criticism for Rostow. So because we talk about the criticism for Rostow, I will continue. So this is the criticism for Rostow. The first one is traditional society is not essential, like the US case. And then the preconditions need not to precede takeoff. So like I told you before, the current developing country, especially, they don't need to go rigidly with the 5 stage because they can more easily adopt the modern technology. And then sometimes there is overlapping of different stage. What I mean by this is sometimes, like, let me erase this. So sometimes the stage is overlap with each other. For example, when a country is in their transitional stage, transitional stage here, it can be overlapped with the takeoff stage, for example. Or when a country in the 4th stage here, the drive to maturity, when there are a lot of innovation and then the investment is really high, it could be overlapped with the high mass consumption. So there is overlap of the stage. And then the next criticism, so overlapping, it's difficult to divide growth process in distinct states. That's also correct, because when a country grow, we sometimes cannot identify. So like, for example, Indonesia is rapidly growing, right? But we cannot easily identify whether right now Indonesia is in the stage 3, or are we in the stage 4, or are we already in the stage 5? We don't know that because the stage might overlap, because the growth is very dynamic and it will still happen for a long time. So we cannot really identify when a country grow, in which stage they are. So that's the criticism of Rostow theory. That's why it's not very often that people will explain growth and development using Rostow theory nowadays. Okay, but the Rostow theory is good for us to understand that in the old days, people used to classify growth through this theory. Okay, wait a minute. Let me. I will continue. And then the next one is Harrod-Domar theory. This is also one of the very old theory about growth here, other than Rostow. The Harrod-Domar model suggests that the rate of economic depends on 2 things. So there are two important things here. The first one is level of saving. Higher savings enable higher investment. Higher savings enable higher investment. And then the second one is capital output ratio. So for Harrod-Domar, capital output ratio is important. So you can already guess that the Harrod-Domar theory is a theory post-revolution industry, because we talk about capital output ratio here. A lower capital output ratio means investment is more efficient and the growth rate will be higher. Let me underline this for you. Lower capital output ratio means investment is more efficient and the growth will be higher. Why? Because with the lower capital output ratio, it means that for a small number of capital, you can produce more output. So it means that our investment in capital is very efficient, because we spend money on a rather low capital, but the output is higher than the ratio, than the number of capital. So that's increasing return to scale. If you remember that concept in microeconomics, for example, if you invest in 1 capital, your output is more than 1. If you invest in 10 capital, then your output is more than 10. So that's the lower capital ratio. Okay. So Harodomar say that if a country could have lower capital output ratio, then it means the growth will be higher. And Harodomar believe that saving equals to investment. So the higher saving level of a country, then their investment level will also be higher. So this is some of the equation in Harodomar theory. So Harodomar say that, oh, by the way, you can read the complete explanation of each of the equation in your textbook. This is just the main idea of the equation. So as here, this is saving. So saving is a function of income or function of GDP. So the capital S is saving, meanwhile the lowercase s here is means that saving is function of Y. Y is income or GDP. We can also define the lowercase s here as gross saving. And then investment equals to the delta K or change of capital. So if we invest, those investment will go to the change of capital. If we invest 10, and then the capital, and then we will have 10 more capital. If we invest 20, and then we will have 20 more capital. So that's why investment equals to delta K or change of K. And then change of K actually equals to, this is the capital, sorry, let me, change of K equals to C times delta Y. The C here, this is the capital output ratio. So let me, capital, no, I will just, this is the capital output ratio. Output ratio. So the change in K equals to capital output ratio times the change in Y. Okay, and then after that, Harodomar stated that saving equals to investment. So using all of this information here, then we can say that saving equals to gross saving times income, which equals to capital output ratio times change of Y equals to change in K, and then equals to investment. Okay, so saving equals investment. In Harodomar's world, all of the saving from the people will go to investment. Does it happen in real life? Well, Solow model also say similar things. So according to Solow model, the saving that the people in the country put, they will go to fund investment. Okay. And then after that, so we know that this is saving. And then this is delta K here. Wait, let me. Yep. I think I'm right. This is the saving, and then this is delta K. And then if we transform this equation, then we will have this change in Y or change in GDP or change in, well, you can call GDP, you can call income, you can call output also, divided by, wait, let me use GDP so the context will be correct here. This is growth. So the growth rate of a country equals to gross saving divided by capital output ratio. So this is gross saving divided by capital output ratio. Output ratio. Nah, so this is a change in income or change in GDP divided by GDP. Change in income divided by income equals to gross saving divided by capital output ratio. So that's why if the capital output ratio is small, it means that the growth will be higher, right? If the capital output ratio is small, then the growth will be higher. So that's what Harrod-Domar mean, because it means when the capital output ratio is small, then our investment will result in higher output. We invest 10, the output is more than 10. We invest 20, the output is more than 20. So Harrod-Domar believe that the key for high growth is high saving and low capital output ratio. Okay, if the gross saving is high, then the growth is also high. Okay, is it clear here? Or if you have question, you can ask me. Not yet. Okay, I will go on. We have talked about this criticism of Rostow theory. Let me Rostow. Okay. Okay, the next one, we will talk about structural change model. The structural change model, we call this the Lewis two-sector model. So the idea here is structural change model focus on the mechanism by which underdeveloped economies transform their domestic economic structure from heavy emphasis on traditional subsistence agriculture to a more modern, more urbanized, and more industrially diverse manufacturing and service economy. So Lewis believed that the growth path of a country, underdeveloped countries will transform into developed countries when they shift their economic structure from agriculture to modern economy, from subsistence to industry or manufacture or service economy. So Lewis believed that as time goes by, a country that first heavily rely on agriculture will eventually shift their structure to the modern sector. That's the main idea of Lewis theory. To explain Lewis theory, then we will explain how the two sector shift here. Okay. Before we go to the graphical explanation, let me show you the Lewis two-sector model assumption. So there are some assumptions in the Lewis theory, at least 6. The first assumption is the model assume that developing economy has surplus of unproductive labor in agricultural sector. So Lewis assumed that there is always a surplus in the labor in agricultural sector. And then Lewis also assumed that these workers are attracted to the growing manufacturing sector when higher wages are offered. So the wage in the modern sector is higher in here. So the wage in the modern sector is higher than the wage in agriculture. And the worker can shift freely in the two sector. It also assumed that the wage in manufacturing sector are more or less fixed. So the wage in the manufacturing sector more or less fixed, and then entrepreneur in the manufacturing sector make profit because they charge a price above the fixed wage rate. So the manufacturing sector are profitable. So this is not a perfect competition market, because there will be no profit in a perfect competition market, but the manufacturing sector is profitable in here. And then the model assumes that this profit will be reinvested in the business to form fixed capital. Now, this is, I think, the most important assumption in Lewis theory. So Lewis assumed that the profit in the manufacture will always be reinvested. So the profit will not go to the CEO or the owner or the entrepreneur, no, but the profit will always be reinvested to buy new capital or fixed capital, like for example, machine and then building. So that's an example of fixed capital. And then the last one, an advanced manufacturing sector means an economy has moved from traditional to industrialized one. So this is the main idea of Lewis theory. There is a shift in the economy structure from traditional to industrialized. Okay, so let's see the graphical explanation. You can find this graph in your textbook. Let me show you. Okay, this part is the modern sector, and then this part is the traditional sector. Let's take a look at the traditional sector first, shall we? Okay, yeah, I can zoom. So this is, let me use another color. The y-axis in here is the average product in the traditional sector. Meanwhile, the x-axis in here is the quantity of labor in the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector will hire labor. The quantity labor hired in agriculture sector is LA in here. And then the wage in agriculture sector is WA here. And then this line here, this is the marginal product of labor in agriculture sector, and this is the average product of labor in agriculture sector. So because we have the diminishing return, of course, the marginal product and average product have a negative slope. But the thing that we have to carefully examine here, because Lewis assumed that the wage and then the, before we go there, let's go to the total production factor in the agriculture sector. So this was the average product and marginal product in agriculture sector. Now we go to their total product. For example, in agriculture sector, we produce food. This is the total production function in agriculture sector. You see, because the diminishing return in labor product, so the total production function will go with positive slope, but at this point here, it will stuck and it cannot produce, the capacity of production cannot be expanded. Why? Because we have law of diminishing return or law of diminishing product here. So this is what happened in the agriculture. So that's why the number of people hired in agriculture sector will always be at LA in here. Because the people who are hired will always be the amount of LA. So the agriculture sector actually have a lot of surplus labor. So there is a surplus labor in the agriculture. So that's the situation in the agriculture sector. Because the agriculture sector still rely heavily in their traditional system, their capital will also be wait. The correct word is their capital is stagnant. You cannot expand the number of capital in the agriculture sector. It will always be this KA here. The amount of the number of capital in the agriculture sector will always be KA here. So this is the situation of agriculture sector. There is surplus of labor, and then the capital cannot be expandable. It will always be KA. Okay, so that's the situation in the agriculture sector. So let's take a look the situation in the modern sector or in the industrial or manufacturing sector. Okay, so this is the modern or industrial sector. Let's see the y-axis here. Okay. The y-axis here, this is the marginal product of the labor in the modern sector, and the marginal product of the labor in modern sector equals their real wage. So the wage in the agriculture sector will never change. It will always be in WA. Meanwhile, in the modern sector, the wage equals to the marginal product of labor. So if the marginal product of labor go higher, then their wage will also go higher. Okay, so that's the difference between the modern sector and the agricultural sector. The x-axis is the quantity of labor here. For example, if the wage, for example, if let's assume the wage for the modern sector is WM here, and it is higher than the wage in the agriculture sector, because the wage in agriculture sector is here. Because of the difference of the wage here and the wage in the modern sector is higher, what happened is the surplus of labor in the agriculture sector here, they will move and then get hired in the modern sector. So that's what Lewis assumed. The surplus of labor here can be hired in the modern sector. So for example, because the demand for labor equals D1 here, and then the surplus of labor from agriculture will get hired in the modern sector, and now they hire L1 number of labor. And then let's see their total production function. This is their total production function. When they hire L number of labor, then their total production function is this TP1 here. Let me show you this one here. Okay, nah. So this is when they hire L1 number of labor and use KM1 number of capital. Like I said before, because Lewis assumed that in the modern sector, they will always make profit and those profit will get reinvested. And then what they do in the modern sector is they are going to invest more in the capital. So now we have more capital. At first we have KM1 capital. Now we invest more, and then we will have KM2 capital. When we have more capital, it means that the sector will hire also more labor. Why? Because imagine if you buy new machine, then you will need more people to operate the machine, right? So Lewis said that when the capital is going to be higher, then the demand for labor also go higher. D1 will shift to D2, and then what happened to the total production will also go. We will also shift to the higher level. Sorry, and then we will shift from TPM K1 to TPM KM2. And then after that, now we have more profit, then we will invest more in the capital. Now we have capital KM2, and then the demand for labor will go to D2. Then as you can guess, the total production will shift again to the higher level. And then this will go on and on and on and on this will go on and on until the business is going to be expanding very hugely. So Lewis assumed that with this system, what's going to happen is the surplus labor in here will all be absorbed in the modern industry. And then when all of the surplus surplus labor is absorbed here, then the total production is going to go higher, higher, and higher, and it will result in self-sustaining growth. Sustaining growth. And then eventually what's going to happen is, because the modern sector will be much more efficient than the agriculture will be gone, and the economic structure will shift from agriculture to modern. This is the main idea of Lewis theory. It's interesting, right? That from the agriculture, we will shift to modern because in the modern sector, they can keep expanding and absorb the labor from agriculture sector or from rural sector. Well, does it happen in real life? Is the theory correct? Is it verifiable? Is there any evidence that Lewis theory actually works? Well, the truth is, it's not always like that. As you can probably guess, it's not always like that. So there are a lot of criticism in the Lewis theory here. So these are some criticism of Lewis theory. But before I go to the criticism, do you have any question for this part of the slide? If you have any question, I will be happy to answer your question. No? Okay. I will continue then. These are some criticism of Lewis theory. So the first criticism is rate of labor transfer and employment creation may not be proportional to rate of modern sector capital accumulation. That is very true. So Lewis assumed that when the modern sector acquire more capital or more machine, Lewis assumed that it means they will need more people. Is it true? Not always. Sometimes the truth is, when a firms they acquire more machine, sometimes it doesn't mean that they will hire more people, because now we have something called automation. So more machine sometimes more machine not always means more people. Even sometimes machine can be a substitution for a real human being, right? So the rate of substitution, the rate of labor transfer and employment creation is not proportional to the rate of modern sector capital accumulation. So that's where Lewis model get the criticism. And then the second criticism, before I go to the second and third criticism, this is the illustration of the first criticism. So let's see here that the y-axis here is marginal product or real wage of labor in the modern sector. And then the x-axis here is the quantity of labor. So for example, WM here is the wage of the labor in the modern sector, and then the L1 here is the number of labor hired in the modern sector. So if the demand for labor is D1 here, D1 is this line here, this is D1. What's going to happen when there is more more machine, for example, in the firms? According to Lewis theory, what should happen is the demand function should shift here. So the number of people hired is going to go up from L1 to L2. But the truth is, it should be here, right? I will give little star in here so you can differentiate. It should shift from D1 to D2. But the truth is, because more machine does not always mean more people, what's going to happen is the slope of the demand curve might change. The slope of the demand curve might change from D1 to D2 here. So If the slope change, it means that even though we have more machine, the number of people hired does not change. It will stay in the L1 here. So the surplus of labor from the agriculture sector cannot be hired or will not be hired in the modern sector because of this change, because there is automation, because sometimes machine is substitution for human being. So that's where Lewis' theory cannot be applicable in real life, especially in the modern life like this era. Okay, so that's the criticism of Lewis' theory. Okay, and what's the second criticism? The second criticism is surplus in labor in rural areas and full employment in urban. Wait a minute, what? Surplus labor in rural areas and full employment. Oh, okay. So Lewis always assumed that in rural areas will always have surplus of labor. Well, it's not always true. That the rural area will always have surplus labor is not always true. And then Lewis also assumed that in urban, there will always be full employment. Why full employment? Because like Lewis explained before, everyone will get hired in the urban, everyone in the modern sector or urban area will always get hired. Why? Because the business or the manufacture sector will always expanding, right? When they expand more and more, Lewis assumed that it means everyone who look for a job in the urban area can be hired, but it's not true because full employment cannot happen. Give it in the urban area and rural area, and the rural area do not always have surplus of labor. Even if the rural areas have surplus of labor, the labor between two sectors is not always interchangeable. You know why? Because sometimes in the industrial sector, they will require their worker to, like, for example, have some level of education or have some experience, or maybe they want them to have some skills. Meanwhile, the labor in the rural area, sometimes they can be uneducated, they can be unskilled, and they can have like zero experience, for example. So the labor in the rural and the urban areas or in the traditional and modern sector is not always easily transferable. Okay, and then the third criticism is the institutional factor. So the institutional factor has a lot to do with like rules of the game here. So the institutional system in a country doesn't always allow people to freely transfer from agricultural sector to the modern sector. Okay, and then the last one, assumption of diminishing return in modern industrial sector. So this is also important. So in this theory, like I said before, Lewis assumed that the modern sector can always expand. So expand from here to here, and then to here, and then expand until it becomes self-sustaining growth. But this is not true, because even in the modern industry or manufacturing sector, diminishing return exists. So it cannot be infinitely expanding like the universe. No, it cannot be infinitely expanding. There will always be diminishing returns. Okay. So that's the Lewis industry. I mean Lewis theory. But because there are criticisms of the Lewis theory, it doesn't mean that the fact that economic structure shifting doesn't happen in real life. Actually, structural shift in the economy do happen in real life. It's just it doesn't happen this way. It doesn't happen exactly like the theory said. What I mean by this is it has happened in this world. Like there are a lot of evidence. Country used to rely heavily on the agriculture, but now they rely heavily on the manufacture. Like for example, Japan, South Korea, China, and maybe even Indonesia in the near future will also be like that. But the assumption that it's going to be self-sustaining growth and this is expanding indefinitely, it has a lot of criticism to it. And then to assume that surplus of labor will all be hired in the modern sector also has a lot of criticism. Okay, but it doesn't mean that the shift in the economic structure cannot happen. You have any question for the Lewis model?
Ma'am?
Yes,
I
please.
have a clarification. Actually, it's not about the Lewis model, but it's about the Harrod-Domar model. When you said that it's the capital output ratio, is that what we refer to as ICOR or the incremental capital output ratio, or is there another variable, ma'am?
Okay. Wait, you said ICOR?
Yes, ma'am. I want to know, is that what we mean when we say the incremental capital output ratio? Because I think that's quite common. I just want to know the real variable that we use in measuring that.
Okay, let me take a look at ICOR. Oh yeah, yep, that's exactly. So the incremental capital output ratio, or ICOR, explains the relationship between the level of investment made in the economy and the consequent increase in GDP. So yes, what we mean by capital output ratio here is similar to the ICOR. You can call this ICOR. Thank you for the clarification. If you are more familiar with this term, you can use it for exam or for homework. I will consider it interchangeable with the capital output ratio.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yep, you're very welcome. Is there any other question or clarification that you want to make? No? Okay, I will continue then. So this is, okay, the empirical pattern. Okay, so this part, the empirical patterns of development example. So this is some example of growth pattern or development pattern in real world. The first one is switch from agriculture to industry. Like I said previously, that shift in the economic sector, like for example, from agriculture to industry and service, do happen in real life, although it's not necessarily in accordance with the Lewis theory. And then the rural-urban migration and urbanization, this is also correct, and there are a lot of evidence. So the growth pattern or development pattern usually has a lot of, has a lot to do with urbanization. Because with urbanization, it means that a lot of people from the rural area they go to the urban area, and the urban area they expected to get a better quality of life by getting a better job or maybe better education and things like that. And then the third one is steady accumulation of physical and human capital. So the growth pattern from the growth pattern towards developed countries, from developing to developed countries, they usually have a lot of correlation with steady accumulation of physical and human capital. Like for example, the investment in technology and better infrastructure, and then also better human capital, like better access to education, better access to health, and then better access to better living condition. So that has a lot of to do that's important factor for development. And then the last one, population growth, first increasing and then decreasing with the decline in family size. So this is a phenomena that happens in a lot of countries actually. So let's take an example of Europe, for example. So in the Europe, England, for example, in England, not England, Europe in general. So in Europe, in general, they used to rely on agriculture, right? Before the industrial revolution, they rely a lot in agriculture. And when they rely on agriculture, the population growth tend to increase rapidly. Why? Because they need more people to take care of the land or take care of the agriculture sector. So a family typically have a lot of children, so they can help in the farm, for example. But after the industrial revolution, after the modernization and new technological knowledge, now the family size seem to get smaller. Most of people doesn't seem to have as many children as it was in the past. This is a very typical path for developed countries. So their family size used to be big. Now their family size is smaller. Because now, why is it like that? Well, maybe because now they don't have to work in the farm, or maybe because the costs in raising children now very high. And then maybe because they are now focused more in the career, so they don't have time to raise a lot of children like it was in the past. So that pattern is very typical and very common in the developed countries. It also happened in Japan, it happens in the US. I think in Indonesia, it also happened like that. I bet a lot of you only have like 1 or 2 siblings. Meanwhile, my mother, she has 6 siblings. So in Indonesia, the family size used to be very big. Now it's not very big anymore. Okay, so this is the empirical pattern of development. Okay. And then now let's discuss about the international dependence revolution. So okay. We will discuss about let me put this in a good sentence. So there is a paradigm that said developing countries in their journey to achieve development target, sometimes they could rely heavily or they could be dependent with the international world or with the foreign country in this case. So there are some theory that can explain this. The first one is the neo-colonial dependence model. This usually happens to developing countries that used to be colonialized. So they still have legacy of the colonialism, like the law system in this country. It's still similar to the to what the Netherlands left us. So that's the legacy of colonialism. And then sometimes in a country that are what is it in English? So this country used to be colonialized, and then after that, the colonials give them independence, like Malaysia and Singapore, the Commonwealth country, I think that's what they call. So there is unequal power. And then core periphery here, please read this in your textbook. I think I forgot to put explanation on this point here. So please check this in your textbook. But the main idea of neocolonial dependence model is usually developing countries who used to be colonialized, their path towards development still has a lot of correlation with the legacy of colonialism. Okay. And then the second one, the false paradigm model. The false paradigm model, this is where, let me just read this for you, pitfalls of using expert foreign advisors who misapply developed countries model. An example for this is if there is a developing countries who seek help for expert from foreign countries, foreign developed countries, and then the expert give idea or opinion that is not very suitable for the developing countries. Why? Because the expert don't really understand the situation of the developing countries. Like for example, in Africa, when there are a lot of foreign experts that go there and then said that the problem with Africa is Africa needs to do A, B, C, but they don't actually understand that the problem that Africa face cannot be solved with A, B, C opinion that they have. So that's the false paradigm model, because the paradigm of the expert is not suitable with the developing countries that seek help from them. And then we have the dualistic development thesis in here. Superior and inferior elements can coexist, Prebys-Singer hypothesis. Oh, wait a minute. Let me open the textbook for a while, because I'm afraid if I told you something not correct from here. Let me open the textbook. Meanwhile, if you have question, you can ask me while I open your textbook. I want to confirm something. Here it is. Okay, the false paradigm. The dualism, the main idea of dualism here is the coexistence of two situations of phenomena that are mutually exclusive to different groups of society. For example, extreme poverty and affluence, modern and traditional economic sector, growth and stagnation, and higher education amid large scale of illiteracy. Okay, so the dualistic development thesis here say that implicit in structural change theories and explicit in international dependence theories is the notion of world of dual societies of rich nation and poor nation. In the developing countries, pocket of wealth within broad areas of poverty. Dualism is a concept widely discussed in development economics. It represents the existence and persistence of substantial and even increasing divergence between rich and poor nation and rich and poor people on various levels. Specifically, although the traditional concept, wait a minute. Okay. 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 So the dualistic development thesis here, it says that rich and poor countries exist together in this world, and in the poor countries or in the developing countries, some of the population are rich and some of the population may not be rich. And it is also said here that the interrelation between the superior and inferior elements are such that the existence of the superior elements does little or nothing to pull up the inferior element. So actually, this dualistic development thesis is the criticism for trickle down economics. I am sure you have heard about the trickle down economics. So the trickle-down economics said that because a country is rich and the other are poor, then the rich countries will eventually pull up the poor countries so that the poor countries can get rich also. But that doesn't happen in real life, because the truth is, in real life, there is a dualistic existence between the rich countries and the poor countries. And the existence of the rich countries doesn't make the poor countries better. So this dualistic development thesis is actually criticism for the trickle-down economics. Oh, this is the criticism, actually. I missed this. This is the criticism and the limitation. So it does little to show how to achieve development in a positive sense, and then accumulating counter examples. So the criticism of all of this international dependence, this international dependence revolution. So it says that even though developing countries sometimes can have benefit by having relation with the international world, or in this case, international dependence relation, the criticism is it does little to show how to achieve development, because all of this stuff in here in a positive sense, and then it accumulating counter examples. The counter examples is even without all of these three, actually developing countries can thrive really well. Is it true? Well, it's debatable. Everything in the development economics is debatable, and I think everyone is free to have their opinion. In my opinion, it have their advantage and disadvantage. Okay, let me continue. And then the neoclassical counter revolution, market fundamentalism. Okay, so this is challenging the status model, free markets, public choice, and market-friendly approach. So there is a theory in the economics development that very pro market. This neoclassical counter-revolution, this is a theory from the 1980s. So the 1980s resurgence of neoclassical free market orientation toward development problem and policies counter to the interventionist dependence revolution of the 1970s. So this theory here, this is theory that said in order to achieve development target, we need to be very pro-market. We need to have a free market, free public choice, and then market-friendly approach. So it relies a lot in the market. The characteristic of this theory is free market approach, public choice approach, and then market-friendly approach. The main arguments of this theory is it denies efficiency of intervention. And then, so according to this theory, anything that intervene the market cannot result in a positive stuff. So the market cannot be intervened. And then it points up state-owned enterprise failures. So they are not pro-government. And then it stress government failures. Like I said before, they are not pro-government. And then traditional neoclassical growth with diminishing return cannot sustain growth by capital accumulation alone. So they said that the traditional neoclassical growth model that has diminishing return cannot sustain growth by capital accumulation alone. So the main argument here is leave it to the market that will help with the path towards development. Okay. Do you agree with this theory? I don't think, I mean, this is my personal opinion, but I don't think it's wise to just give everything to the market without zero intervention, because the truth is sometimes We need intervention, especially when most of the population in the countries are vulnerable. Like we have, we need social protection, we need public goods, we need infrastructure, and the one that can provide it is the government. That's my personal opinion. You are free to have your own personal opinion. Okay, this is the last slide. The classic theories of development, reconciling the difference. Now, this is the moderate, the moderate theories of development that reconcile the difference. So this theory, at some point they are pro-market, but at some point they are pro-government intervention. So the main idea of this theory is we have to keep it in the correct proportion. Yes, governments do fail, but so do market. A balance is needed. Basically, this is the main idea of the theory. And then we must attend to institutional and political realities in developing world. So when we talk about the policy for developing world, we have to take a good look in the realities in terms of institutional and political realities. And then development economics has no universally accepted paradigm. I 100% agree with this. We have discussed a lot of theory in development, and according to this moderate theory, development economics has no universally accepted paradigm. It will always go case by case, country by country. And then insight and understanding are continually evolving. So the understanding and the insight of development will always evolve. And then each theory has some strength and has some weakness. This is very wise and this is very true because each theory has their own strength and then their weakness. This is the last slide of the classical theory in development. And then after that, this is some concept that you can review from your textbook. And then this is more concept that you can review. And then this is some appendix that you can take a look also in your textbook. Yeah, I think you can check it out yourself. I'm going to take a look at this, for example, effect of increase in physical and human resource in the production possibility frontier. So if you invest in both physical and human resource, then what's going to happen to your production possibility frontier is it's going to shift. It's going to shift in both axes, Y and X axis. But if you, okay, capital stock and land in the production possible. Okay, but if you invest in one of the, no, I think it's wrong to say. So this is effect of growth of capital stock. So growth of capital stock in land and, oh, sorry. This is effect of growth of capital stock and land on the production possibility frontier. Like for example, a country produce radios and rice. If there is a growth in the capital stock, then the production of the radios will go up, but the production of the rice will not go as much as the radio. But you invest more in the land, then the production of rice is going to go higher, and the change in the radio production is not as high as the rice. Okay. And then this is effect of technological change. But if what's changed is the technological change, then what's going to happen to the production possibility frontier is the slope is going to change. The slope here is going to change. So with the same amount of resource, now you can produce more rice, and the production of the radios doesn't change because the technological in agriculture, for example, now with the amount, the same amount of resource, you can produce more rice. Okay. This is what happens if the technological change happens in the manufacture of the radio. With the same amount of resource, now you can produce more radios. And then the last appendix, this is the solo growth model. I think you better to read it yourself. But the main idea of the solo model is rather similar to the Horodomar when he said here that the Y or the output of a country is a function of their capital and labor. Where they use here is actually this is K, not Y. So the function of capital, labor, and technology. That's the main idea of solo. So that's why we have to invest either in technology, labor, or capital. Okay. Okay. Okay, last one. This is what I want to show you with the solo. So this is the long run effect of solo model. So imagine that the Y here is the output of a country and K here is number of capital. So with the solo model, so saving equals with investment, right? So more saving, as F here is saving. So if you have more saving, it means you can invest in more capital. So the first one, the saving is here. This is the first saving rate. Your capital level is in here. And then the saving rate go up here to the second one. And then your capital will go up as well. So your output from here will go to here. Actually, this is pretty similar to Horodomar. So this is Y1, this is Y2. More saving, more investment in capital, it means more output. Okay, and then this here is the depreciation of capital. Depreciation. Okay, so that's the main idea of solo. And then you also have Romer, the endogenous growth model. In the endogenous growth model, Romer believed that the key for growth is endogenous. What we mean by endogenous, if you can make sure that the quality of the input for your production, which means labor and capital, and also technology, is in a good quality, then the growth rate is going to be high. It's going to be better than before. That's the main idea of endogenous growth model. Okay, I think that's it, my material for today. Do you still have any question? No? Okay, if you don't have any question, then I will finish today's material in here. And then the next chapter is already on YouTube, and this video I will upload on YouTube as well. I will share the PPT with you later. Okay, see you next week. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.